There are only a handful of things in life that we can count on: death, taxes, and Kirk Cousins coming up short in key moments. Kirk Cousins can be a very difficult player to evaluate. On the surface, he's a very good player and a true competitor, and his statistics certainly back that up, but he doesn't get it done when it matters most. It's hard to remember now, but months before the Vikings traded for Cousins, they were in the NFC Championship game with Case Keenum behind center. It is clear that Minnesota had a roster built to compete, but it regressed back to mediocrity under Cousins. Probably the most damning stat is Mike Zimmer's record against teams with a winning record. Before Cousins, he was 12-20. After, Zimmer went just 7-26. Mike Zimmer coached the Vikings for 8 years, starting in 2014, and it can be perfectly broken up into two halves: pre and post Kirk Cousins contract. The pre-Cousins contract era had 4 quarterbacks that played at least 3 games over the 4-year period: Teddy Bridgewater, Matt Castle, Sam Bradford, and Case Keenum. Over the span, the Vikings only had a losing record once, won the division once, and made the playoffs twice. But during the post-Cousins contract era, the Vikings had a losing record twice, they never won the division, and they only made the playoffs 1 time. Somehow, after improving the quarterback position, and yes, it was an improvement at the quarterback position, Minnesota was worse.
No! That biggest deal we're gonna have!
Damn! I'm sorry.
Garrett! Gosh, Garrett! Are you serious? It's not my fault!
If you pull up a dictionary and look up the word game manager, chances are you're going to see a picture of Kirk Cousins. He's almost the exact definition. He's not going to make a lot of mistakes. He's going to limit turnovers, and he's not going to be the reason why you lose a football game. But he's not going to be the reason why you win. Mike Zimmer was right. Cousins doesn't evaluate the players around him, and especially in today's NFL, you need to have a guy that makes everyone else better, and he just doesn't do that. The Vikings have a very tough decision coming up with Kirk Cousins' contract. He signed that 3-year, $84 million deal in 2018, and he is finally coming up on his last year. Now, the Minnesota Vikings need to figure out if they want to sign a mediocre quarterback for a long term, or if they just want to franchise tag him and figure it out from there. Sound familiar? Rewind to 2016. The then Redskins found themselves in a predicament with a mediocre but stable Kirk Cousins coming off of his rookie deal, and they had to find out if the two sides could find the right dollar amount or if Washington should just use the franchise tag. Of course, Washington used the tag for 2 straight years, and the two never figured it out, and Washington let him walk away for nothing. Going through the whole Kirk Cousins contract debacle was very frustrating as a Washington fan, and so now watching Minnesota Vikings fans just go through the exact same thing and be completely split as a fan base, it's the exact same, and it's fucking hilarious to watch. After 8 seasons and only 2 playoff victories, Mike Zimmer was fired, and now it's starting to become apparent that there were some frustrations with Kirk Cousins. Chad Graff reported that Zimmer would complain about Cousins in coaching meetings, and some of his top staff members had the same feelings. Zimmer didn't think Cousins had enough winning plays. He didn't make the players around him better, and he just simply didn't take the chances that he needed to in order to secure wins. It's definitely a bad sign that Zimmer was at odds and talking shit about his own starting quarterback behind his back, but you can't actually argue that he was really wrong. Everything in the report's true, and it's why Kirk Cousins is such a tough case study. Kirk Cousins hasn't been good in key moments. He has made some clutch plays and he's won some games for his teams at times, but he usually doesn't. That being said, Kirk Cousins is without a doubt one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL last season. PFF graded him out as the number 6 quarterback in the league, and that was the reality. He did everything he was asked of him, and while he is in no way going to make plays like Josh Allen or Aaron Rodgers, Cousins is by definition the perfect game manager. And that's okay. If you don't have one of those top 5 guys, then that's what you kind of have to deal with, and it works. Matthew Stafford was a game manager for the Rams, and if you want the truth, Kirk Cousins was even better than him last year. I do fully believe that if you switched Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins, that Rams team would have been even better last year. Now, I think a lot of that does come from Kirk Cousins really knowing Sean McVay well, and they were with each other in Washington, but the point does still stand. I think they'd be a better team. It's going to take a perfect situation to get the most out of Kirk Cousins, and if that's going to happen, it's probably going to be with Kevin O'Connell, his new head coach. There's already an existing relationship between the two when O'Connell was his quarterback's coach in Washington, and he's gained some positive experience in the past 2 years as Sean McVay's offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. The young coach wave that started with McVay has already paid off for the Bengals with Zach Taylor, and now it's time to see if the Vikings were able to hit on O'Connell. In a way, the hiring of Kevin O'Connell does signal the possibility that Kirk Cousins stays in Minnesota long term, or at least for a few more years to see if the two can figure things out. But I am willing to bet that the Vikings have looked at all the avenues what they can possibly do in the future. I certainly don't think Minnesota will select a quarterback in the 2022 NFL draft, but if a guy that they absolutely love falls in front of them, the front office is definitely going to pull the trigger. The Vikings took Kellen Mond in the 3rd round last year, and I actually really liked him as a prospect, but it is hard to say what his future looks like. I don't know what he's looked like in practice, and he pretty much didn't see the field at all last season, and with a new head coach and a new general manager whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce,
Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah.
there's really no loyalty to Kellen Mond. That isn't the guy that they wanted. They didn't draft him, so I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of just gets left in the dust. And that's just how it goes sometimes. This is going to be a big offseason for the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, and it sounds like he has no willingness to restructure his contract of that wild $45 million cap hit. Minnesota sits around $16 million over the cap right now, and it's going to be a big struggle if they want to bring back some of their key pieces, especially on defense. All-Pro Anthony Barr and Pro Bowler Shelton Richardson are up for new deals on the D-line, and then in the secondary, All-Pro Patrick Peterson, who's kind of washed now, and Xavier Woods have some expiring contracts. There's going to be a lot of hard decisions to make in the Vikings front office, and I think a name that is worth looking at is All-Pro Danielle Hunter, who could potentially save $15 million if Minnesota did want to cut him. Of course, if the Vikings wanted to clear out a lot of space and bolster their defense, there is one more option. Trade Kirk Cousins. Cutting Cousins isn't going to help anything, but if you can manage to trade him, it would save $35 million. There have been some wild quarterback trades with a lot of cap moving in recent years. Matthew Stafford's situation is a good example, and I'd say that really did work out for both the Lions and obviously the Rams. Remember, the Browns once traded for Brock Osweiler and got picks in return, essentially just to take that contract while they were rebuilding. It would be hard, but there are some ways for the Vikings to move on if they really wanted to, but that's probably not going to be the case. So what do you do with Kirk Cousins? Well, the way I see it, there's essentially 4 different options that they can do. They can either go draft someone new and kind of just move on from Kirk Cousins, or they can trade and just get rid of Kirk Cousins altogether, or you can sign Kirk Cousins long term, or you can just franchise tag him and try to ride it out. In terms of trade potential, it's kind of hard to see who would want to go after a $45 million cap hit, so that leaves a big question there. Plus, I don't know if the value of Kirk Cousins is that high, because again, if you are really trying to win a Super Bowl, he just can't come up in the big moments. Drafting a quarterback seems like a bad idea this year. I really don't think this is a good class. Of course, if Minnesota really likes a guy, they can go after him, but I think they're probably happy with Kellen Mond, and maybe that was the thought process there. Signing him to a long-term deal feels pretty risky. You know he's a pretty mediocre quarterback. Even though he plays great in the regular season, it's a really, really risky to sign somebody worth that much money if they aren't going to lead you to a Super Bowl and don't have that pure talent of the top guys like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. That leaves what I think is the most likely option, and that is just franchise tagging Kirk Cousins and trying to figure it out from there. And I saw the song and dance with Washington. It's very frustrating, and it's a complete mess, but I think that's what's going to end up happening here with Kirk Cousins once again. At the end of the day, I really hope that isn't the case. I would love for Kirk Cousins to get a long-term deal or get traded somewhere else, go to a really good team and really figure it out, because I do think that he has the potential to be a really good quarterback if you can put him in the perfect system, and maybe Kevin O'Connell can do that, but regardless, I'm going to keep rooting for Kirk Cousins no matter what. I've been a big fan of Kirk Cousins since he first went to Washington. He's always been a great guy to me, but I love him as a player, but at the end of the day, he is what he is. He's a mediocre game manager, and you can't pay him a ton of money.